Welcome to the new video of Neurophilos. Get ready to dive into a gripping tale that will leave you breathless, thinking, and inspired. Whether you're here for the mystery, the drama, or the unexpected twists, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Let's begin. The comfort of not choosing. Most people move through life believing they are trapped by forces outside their control. They describe their situation as if it were a fixed reality. The family they were born into, the opportunities they never had, the personality they think they possess, the past they believe cannot be changed. These explanations sound reasonable, even mature. They offer relief. They soften disappointment. They remove guilt. They allow someone to say, "This is just how life turned out for me." From the outside, this way of thinking often appears grounded and realistic. It feels responsible to acknowledge limits. It feels honest to admit that circumstances shape us. And to some extent, they do. But Jean-Paul Sartre believed that something far more unsettling hides beneath this calm surface. According to him, when a person explains their entire life through circumstances alone, they are not simply being realistic. They are avoiding something. What they are avoiding is freedom. Sartre argued that the most uncomfortable truth of human existence is not that life is unfair, but that the individual is radically free. And because they are free, they are also fully responsible for what they become. This idea is not comforting. It does not feel empowering at first. It feels dangerous. Because if freedom is real, then the familiar explanations we lean on begin to crack. Most people do not deny freedom directly. They deny it indirectly through language that sounds reasonable. They say, "I had no choice." They say, "That's just the kind of person I am." They say, "I can't act differently right now." Over time, these statements stop sounding like explanations and start feeling like facts. They harden into identity. Sartre called this bad faith, a subtle but powerful form of self-deception. Not lying to others, but lying to oneself in order to escape the weight of responsibility. Bad faith allows a person to see themselves as an object shaped by forces rather than as a subject who chooses. It is comforting precisely because it dulls awareness. It makes life feel inevitable instead of authored. But Sartre insisted that this comfort comes at a cost. In his view, freedom is not about doing whatever one wants. It is not a celebration of desire or impulse. It is the realization that there is no predefined essence waiting inside you, no inner blueprint, no destiny to fall back on. You exist first, and only afterward do you define yourself through action. Every choice contributes to who you are becoming. Even refusing to choose is still a choice. Even surrendering control to others is an act for which you remain responsible. This is why freedom feels heavy. It does not arrive as excitement. It arrives as pressure. The pressure of knowing that you cannot escape authorship, that no explanation, however convincing, fully removes responsibility from your hands. Bad faith offers relief from this pressure. It tells you that your life is already written, that your limitations are fixed, that your role has been assigned. It creates the feeling that life is something that happens to you rather than something you participate in creating. And once this belief settles in, it becomes easy to confuse safety with truth. Sartre believed most people cling to this safety for their entire lives, not because they are weak, but because freedom is genuinely unsettling. To accept it fully would mean admitting that one's current life, its frustrations, compromises, and unrealized possibilities, is not merely the result of circumstance. It is the result of countless small choices made over time. This is the uncomfortable ground where Sartre begins. Not with hope, not with reassurance, but with a challenge. If you feel trapped, if your life feels fixed, the question may not be what the world has done to you. The question may be what you have been choosing, quietly, repeatedly, while telling yourself you had no choice at all. And once that question is allowed to surface, there is no going back. Condemned to be free. Once the illusion of inevitability begins to crack, a more unsettling realization follows. Freedom is not something you gain. It is something you already have, and there is no opting out of it. Jean-Paul Sartre insisted that you do not get to decide whether you are free, only how you will live with that freedom. This is the meaning behind his most famous claim: Existence precedes essence. Human beings are not born with a fixed identity, purpose, or nature. There is no inner script telling you who you are meant to be. You exist first, thrown into a world you did not design, and only afterward do you define yourself through what you do. This idea collides head-on with how most people understand themselves. We prefer to think of identity as something stable and given. We say we are introverted, anxious, broken, ambitious, unlucky. We search for labels that explain us, that hold us still. Sartre saw these labels not as truths, but as temptations, ways of turning a living, choosing subject into something static and manageable. He did not deny that circumstances matter. Your body, your upbringing, your social position, your past experiences, all of these are real. Sartre called them facticity. They form the raw conditions of your existence. You did not choose where you were born or what happened to you early in life. These facts cannot be erased, but they do not decide who you are. What matters, Sartre argued, is how you respond to these facts. This capacity to go beyond given conditions is what he called transcendence, and it is always present. No matter how narrow your situation may feel, you are still choosing how it is interpreted, endured, resisted, or accepted. When you treat facticity as destiny, you deny this freedom and slip back into bad faith. This is where Sartre's philosophy becomes deeply uncomfortable. Freedom is not an optional feature of human life. You cannot suspend it, postpone it, or hand it over to someone else. Even when you say, "I can't change," you are still choosing to remain as you are. Even obedience is a decision. Even silence is an action. Sartre described this condition as a condemnation to freedom. We did not ask to exist. We did not choose the world we were born into. And yet, from the moment we become aware, we are burdened with the responsibility of shaping our lives. There is no higher authority that can relieve us of this task. No external meaning that can excuse us from choosing. This is not the kind of freedom modern culture celebrates. It is not about endless options or personal pleasure. Sartre's freedom is stark and severe. It means that everything is permitted, not because nothing matters, but because there are no excuses left. If you accept this fully, you must also accept that your current life is not an accident, not the fault of your parents, not the fault of your job, not the fault of your past. It is the result of countless small decisions: to stay, to wait, to comply, to avoid conflict, to remain silent, to delay action. These are not dramatic choices, but they are real ones, and together they form a life. Realizing this produces what Sartre called anguish, not ordinary anxiety, but a deep, disorienting fear that comes from recognizing there is no one else to blame. Your life is not happening to you. It is being authored by you moment by moment. This is the point where many retreat. The weight of this freedom feels unbearable. It threatens the comfort of blame and the safety of fixed identity. And so people rush back to explanations, roles, and stories that make life feel stable again. But Sartre's challenge remains. If you are already free, the real question is not whether freedom is fair or desirable. The question is whether you are willing to face it honestly, or whether you will continue to hide from it while calling that hiding realism. Because once you see that freedom is unavoidable, you are left with a stark choice. Live as the author of your life, or spend it pretending you were never given the pen. Excuses and the architecture of self-imprisonment. If freedom is unavoidable, then excuses are not small misunderstandings. They are strategies. They are the structures people build to protect themselves from the weight of responsibility. Jean-Paul Sartre did not see excuses as harmless explanations, but as psychological architecture, carefully arranged ways of making life feel fixed. Excuses are powerful precisely because they do not sound dishonest. They sound reasonable, even virtuous. They often arrive dressed as responsibility, caution, or realism. I can't leave this job because I have obligations. I'm not the kind of person who takes risks. My past made me this way. These statements feel solid. They appear to describe facts. But Sartre would insist on a deeper question. Are these descriptions, or are they choices disguised as inevitability? Sartre never denied that circumstances exert pressure. He understood fear, limitation, and material necessity. What he rejected was the idea that circumstances determine a person's being. This is why he drew such a sharp line between facticity and freedom. Facticity is everything given: your history, your environment, your body, your social position. But freedom lies in how you relate to these facts. When you treat them as destiny, you erase yourself as an agent. This erasure often happens slowly, through repetition. A phrase spoken often enough stops feeling like an excuse and begins to feel like truth. I'm just shy. I'm bad with money. I always sabotage myself. These statements no longer describe behavior. They replace it. A living, choosing person hardens into an identity. And once that identity is accepted, behavior no longer feels like a decision. It feels automatic. This is the heart of bad faith. To Sartre, bad faith is not ignorance. It is an active refusal to see oneself as free. A person in bad faith behaves as if they are an object rather than a subject, something defined, fixed, and predictable. They become their role, their diagnosis, their job title, their story. Like a waiter who performs his role so perfectly that he forgets he is performing at all. They confuse function with self. And yet, the most disturbing part of Sartre's argument is this: even the act of self-deception is a choice. Even hiding from freedom is an expression of it. You cannot stop being free. You can only stop being honest about it. This is why Sartre believed that many of the limitations people experience are not imposed by the world, but manufactured internally. Not in dramatic moments, but through thousands of small avoidances. Each time someone chooses comfort over risk, silence over confrontation, familiarity over uncertainty, they add another brick to a structure that eventually feels like a prison. And then something strange happens. The person begins to resent the walls. They speak of being trapped, stuck, powerless. But they no longer remember when or how the structure was built. The prison feels external, even though it was assembled from inside. Excuses play a crucial role in maintaining this illusion. They create emotional stability. They prevent disorientation. They offer a sense of coherence. This is who I am, and this is why things cannot change. But this coherence comes at the cost of vitality. When identity hardens, possibility shrinks. Sartre did not accuse people of lying to manipulate others. He believed they were lying to survive. Freedom, when faced directly, creates anxiety. It dissolves certainty. It demands ownership. Excuses act as emotional armor. They protect the self from anguish, but they also protect the self from transformation. This is the paradox Sartre exposes. The very narratives meant to keep us safe slowly hollow us out. They reduce a dynamic, open future into a predictable repetition of the past. What feels like realism becomes resignation. What feels like self-knowledge becomes self-confinement. So the question is no longer whether excuses are true or false. The real question is what they are doing. Are they describing reality, or are they preserving a version of the self that feels safer than freedom? Because once that question is asked honestly, the architecture of self-imprisonment begins to reveal itself. And when it does, something unsettling follows. The realization that the door was never locked. It was only closed from the inside. Anguish and the collapse of the self. There comes a moment when the explanations stop working. It is rarely dramatic. There is no announcement, no sudden clarity. Instead, something quietly gives way. The stories that once made life feel manageable begin to sound thin. The excuses lose their weight. What once felt convincing now feels hollow. This moment may arrive through loss, failure, exhaustion, or an unexpected confrontation with oneself. But whatever triggers it, what follows is not relief. It is anguish. Jean-Paul Sartre used this word deliberately. He did not mean anxiety in the clinical sense, nor stress caused by external pressure. He meant a deeper, more unsettling experience. The emotional vertigo that arises when a person fully recognizes their own freedom. Anguish is what happens when the scaffolding of identity collapses and nothing steps in to replace it. When excuses fall away, there is no longer a role to hide behind. No narrative to soften responsibility. No external authority to defer to. What remains is a vast openness, and the realization that whatever comes next is entirely up to you. This is why Sartre refused to romanticize awakening or self-realization. He saw this moment not as enlightenment, but as crisis. The self, stripped of justifications, feels exposed. Familiar reference points vanish. The future, once constrained by stories of inevitability, suddenly appears undefined. And this openness is terrifying. Anguish reveals something most people spend their lives avoiding. There is no final explanation that will absolve you of authorship. No psychological label, no social role, no past event can fully explain why you continue to live as you do. Once this is seen clearly, the comforting belief that life is happening to you dissolves. Sartre described freedom as a condemnation for this reason. You did not ask to exist, but now that you do, you are responsible for what you make of that existence. You cannot pass this burden to your upbringing, your circumstances, or your limitations. Even refusing responsibility is itself a responsible act. At this point, many people turn back. The weight is too much. They return to old identities, old explanations, old routines. They numb themselves with distraction or bury themselves in roles that make choice feel unnecessary. Society makes this retreat easy. It rewards predictability. It encourages the performance of stable identities. It offers endless ways to forget oneself. But Sartre insisted that anguish cannot be erased once it has been genuinely encountered. It can be avoided, postponed, or buried, but it leaves a trace, a quiet awareness that something essential has been seen. And within this discomfort lies a strange reversal. The same freedom that once felt paralyzing also carries a new possibility. If you are not defined by an essence, then you are not trapped by it either. If the self has no fixed core, then it can be shaped. Not according to a script, but through conscious choice. This is where anguish shifts from pure fear to potential power. The collapse of illusion creates space. Where identity once stood rigid, openness appears. Where inevitability once ruled, possibility enters. But this possibility is not comforting. It does not promise happiness or success. It offers no guarantees. What it offers is honesty, the chance to live without pretending that your life is being decided elsewhere. Sartre believed this moment marks the most truthful point of human existence. Not when life feels stable, but when it feels exposed, when the self stands without defenses and sees itself clearly, not as a thing, but as an ongoing act. And this is why anguish matters. It is not something to cure or escape. It is a signal, a sign that you are no longer hiding from freedom, that you are standing at the edge of authorship. What comes next is not automatic. Freedom alone does not create meaning. It only creates the space in which meaning can be chosen. To move forward requires a decision, not to retreat into excuses again, but to live with awareness. This decision marks the transition from avoidance to engagement, from bad faith to something else entirely. It is here, on this unstable ground, that Sartre places the beginning of authenticity. Good faith in the discipline of authorship. After anguish, there is no return to innocence. Once a person has seen that their life is not being lived for them, that their identity is not fixed and their excuses are chosen, something fundamental changes. The question is no longer whether freedom exists. It is how one will live with it. Jean-Paul Sartre called the honest response to this realization good faith, not morality, not virtue, not self-improvement. Good faith is simply the refusal to lie to oneself about freedom. It is the decision to live with clear eyes, without pretending that one is a thing rather than a choosing subject. To live in good faith is to recognize that you are not a completed being. You are a project in motion. There is no final version of you waiting to be uncovered. There is only what you continue to make of yourself through action, attention, and refusal. Identity is not discovered. It is sustained. This does not mean rejecting society, responsibility, or roles. Sartre never argued for isolation or rebellion for its own sake. Roles are unavoidable. Jobs must be done. Relationships must be maintained. But the person in good faith never forgets that these are roles being played, not essences being lived. They act within them consciously, knowing that they could act otherwise. This awareness alters everything. It removes the comfort of fatalism and replaces it with authorship. When you live in good faith, you can no longer say, "This is just who I am," without knowing that this statement itself is a choice. You cannot hide behind your past, your temperament, or your circumstances without recognizing that you are using them as shelter. Good faith demands a different relationship with suffering as well. Pain is no longer proof of victimhood or destiny. It becomes part of the material through which life is shaped. Failure is not an identity. Regret is not a verdict. They are moments in an ongoing process of becoming. Sartre was clear that this way of living is not comfortable. In fact, it is often lonelier and more demanding than life in bad faith. Bad faith offers emotional shortcuts. It allows self-pity. It provides ready-made explanations. Good faith offers none of these. It requires constant attention to one's own evasions and a willingness to confront them without drama. This is why authenticity is not a one-time decision. It is a discipline, a repeated return to honesty. Again and again, the temptation arises to say, I had no choice. Again and again, the task is to recognize the choice that was made and take responsibility for it. Living this way does not guarantee happiness. Sartre never promised peace of mind. What it offers instead is clarity. A life no longer governed by hidden scripts or unconscious avoidance. A life in which actions, even painful ones, belong fully to the person who takes them. At the end of Sartre's philosophy lies a truth both severe and liberating. You are nothing more than the sum of your choices and nothing less. There is no destiny waiting to justify you, but there is also no ceiling imposed on who you may become, except the limits you accept. Freedom initially feels like a burden because it removes excuses, but over time, it reveals something rare: dignity. The dignity of knowing that your life, whatever shape it takes, is not an accident, that you are not merely reacting to the world, but responding to it. This is Sartre's final paradox. In a universe without guaranteed meaning, you are given the power to create meaning through how you live. The silence of the world is not an abandonment, it is an opening. And that opening exists now, not in theory, not later. In each moment where you decide whether to act honestly or hide behind habit, whether to choose consciously or drift. The weight of freedom never disappears, but neither does its possibility. To live in good faith is to carry that weight without denial, and in doing so, to finally stand as the author of one's own life.